PAX, Journey Home, Chapter 32. Following the path to the old mill was like following himself as a kid. Peter could almost hear his friend's dares when he passed the place where a pair of snarling guard dogs used to strain at their chains. At the driveway to the tall, gabled house, abandoned long before the war, he half expected to hear their voices cry out, "We don't believe in witches," along with his. And he almost patted his pockets for an apple, passing the split rail fence where the dapple gray pony used to wait. Once in the woods, which still looked the same as before the war, the feeling was even stronger. There was the black walnut he and his friends had climbed to the very top, their initials carved in its bark. There was the loblolly, where Peter had to bite his tongue every time, because just behind it was a tiny dell where Jack and the pulpits bloomed in March, and his mother had made him swear never to tell anyone that they were that scarce. These things he remembered were only a few moments from his life. Where had all the other moments gone? And where were those boys now, dispersed by the war and the bad water? Would any come back to their empty town? Without enough warning, Peter emerged from the wooded path. His eyes were drawn up immediately to the mill and the ridge above. Jade said that I was brave enough, he reminded himself out loud. Maybe he was, but he needed a moment. He turned his gaze down to the river. The first thing he noticed was that it had breached its banks and spilled a good 10 feet water at each side. It must be 50 feet across now, 60 in some places. Its surface was glassy flat this morning, except for a rolling furrow of current that flowed down the center. Its waters gleamed the same mirror blue as the sky, looking so pure it was hard to believe that what Jade had said. The poisons leaked from the things that had happened here. He looked upriver. The rapids still tumbled, though much tamed to stay. As the fallen water hit the bottom, it leapt out over deep pools. Peter knew those pools from the bottom up, had seen sky through them. A few that, as a boy, he always found disorienting but peaceful at the same time, as though time had relaxed. A huge dead oak had snagged on the wreck of the mill wheel, spanning the river. Half submerged, its roots seemed to lift it in prayer over the far bank. Across the river he recognized the rock where a year ago he'd found the carcass of a fox that for one terrible moment he had feared might be PAX. A few yards up from that rock towered a giant hemlock, its boughs skirting the ground a good 25 feet across. If he were still a kid, Peter and his friends would swim across and storm that hemlock, claim that space under that skirt for a secret hideout. But he was not a kid anymore. It was a long time since he'd been a kid. He turned towards the old mill. All the way up, the meadow seemed almost definitely alive. Blossoms shot out of tall, bright grasses and even burst from the outcroppings of ledge. His mother had taught him the names of the wildflowers in the vicinity as he picked out a few now. Bluebells and columbine and a crispite blossom called bloodroot. That one was well named, he thought, springing out of this bloody soil. Peter started climbing. He passed the spot where his father had run down to meet him, and he kept going until he was inside the crumbling walls of the old mill. Here the troops' tent had been set up. He and his father had gone into one and sat on his cot that last day. They had talked for an hour in a way they had never had before. He found a spot where that cot might have been, and he sat down. Mostly his father had apologized. He regretted a lot of things. Peter had also been so shocked that a bunch of the apologies had washed over him. But he heard the last one. "I'm sorry I made you leave that fox of yours alone by the side of the road in a place that wasn't safe. There must have been a better way." In response, Peter told his father he'd found PAX just upon the ridge, and that there he had set PAX free himself, which was the truth. And then he said, so it was okay making me do that, which was a lie. And then he'd steeled himself and given his father the hard news that he wasn't going back to his grandfather's, that he had found a place where he felt more at home and wanted to live there until the war ended. "She isn't family, but I feel I'm good there. I'm right there." Surprisingly, his father hadn't been angry. "That's okay. If you feel good they're safe, then she's family enough. Something about the words sounded familiar, as if they'd come from someone else. But Peter didn't have time to place them, because then his father promised that things would be different when this was over. I'll be a better parent. Peter's answer to that came without thought. You were a good father, which was both true and not. Clear as anything, he could still see his father's face. Military short hair, shaving cut on his cheek, beseeching eyes that filled with relief at those words. That was the last time Peter had seen him. He was glad it had ended there, with his father looking at him as if he'd been forgiven. Peter stood up. He climbed the rest of the hill, up to the top ridge of trees, and then over to the clearing PAX had led him to. There he had chased off 2 coyotes who had treed another fox, and there he had set PAX free. He sank down under the sweet gum tree in the center. Which of the last times was harder? With his dad not knowing it was the first time, or with PAX knowing? He looked over to the rim of juniper that surrounded the clearing, located the exact spot he'd thrown the toy soldier, this time feeling that PAX knew what he was doing. Every day since he'd wondered if he had done the right thing, sending PAX into the unforgiven wild, where he belonged, but where he wasn't prepared to be, in the company of a burned-tailed vixen. If only he could know PAX was all right. Peter wiped his eyes. He had done enough remembering for one day. He had felt this way into grief, and maybe felt this way a few steps back out. He wished he could talk to Jade about it. He could almost see her pointing down at the river and sharing one of her metaphors about water. He started down the hill. Halfway down, just as he turned for the path of home, he caught a glimpse of something copper across the river, a color that always arrested him. A fox, sitting beside the rock below the ancient hemlock. Adult, big, male probably, healthy-looking, watching him. The fox was too far away for Peter to check for PAX's exact shading, or the single tear in the left ear. He couldn't feel the springy fur his fingers knew, or smell the outdoor oak leaf smell his pet carried indoors. He couldn't hear his rumbling purr or yip of greeting, but he knew, from a sense deeper than those. "PAX!" he yelled, starting to run before he convinced himself he was acting crazy. "Wait!"